Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph, and I am here with two amazing guests. I'm so thrilled that they were able to join us on this episode of the podcast. I'm here with Natalie Celmo and Ellie Carley. They work for EWB-USA, and specifically they work with the Community Engineering Corps. And they're going to tell us more about what that is and how that fits into this environmental justice and climate resilience initiative that is going on at EWB-USA. I can't wait to start talking to them. It's going to be phenomenal. Natalie, Ellie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us, Dr. Leslie. We're so happy to be here.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here. And so I have a lot I want to discuss with you and so much to talk about. But before I get into all of that, could you just tell us your background about yourselves, where you're from, what you grew up loving to do, maybe some educational things that you may have done. If you've done any advocacy work in the past, tell us all about that. And ultimately, how did you find your way to EWB-USA? I would love to learn all about those things. Natalie, you can go first. Ellie, you can go second.
Thank you so much again for having me. My name is Natalie Celmo, and I am a senior program engineer at Engineers Without Borders USA. A little bit about my background. I am currently calling in from Golden, Colorado, but I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I studied civil and environmental engineering at the University of Pittsburgh. And I think what really drew me to engineering in the first place is that I was always good and always drawn to math and science, and engineering, which was a natural fit when it came time to decide a major going into college. I am a first generation college student, so I didn't have much background knowledge on what to expect going into college. But it really was that math and science. And then also my dad being a contractor growing up, that really drew me to engineering. And then sophomore year, when I was at a career fair, or I guess it was a activities fair, where all of the clubs and activities are in one space and advertising, trying to get volunteers, I came upon EWB-USA, and I was really drawn to the work that they do. I was drawn to the fact that they were utilizing engineering skill sets, but actually doing work with real communities. So that is where I got my start at EWB. I continued to be an EWB volunteer throughout college, and it really was my experience with EWB that instilled a passion for engineering in me. So it made it more than just math and science, right? It actually put real people and humanity into engineering, and I saw that the impact that engineering could have on the world through my experience with EWB. So that really stuck with me. After graduating at University of Pittsburgh, I went into the construction management field. So I worked for a large general contractor for a little over 6 years, working on some high-profile construction projects where I was an on-site project engineer. I also did some cost estimating for projects. Most notably, I was on a construction of a high-end hotel in Washington, D.C. for about 5 years of that 6 years of my experience working with that general contractor. And I really did enjoy that experience. I enjoyed the hands-on aspect of construction, the fast-paced nature of construction. But the entire time, I was still drawn to the humanitarian engineering field in my experience with EWB-USA. I was able to stay on as an EWB volunteer while I was working for that general contractor. So that continued that passion. I was able to do that as a side project outside of my day-to-day job. And that was really important for me, right? To have that kind of balance between doing what I was passionate about and then just doing what I was good at for work. After about those 6 years, I decided it was time to really actively try to make that career shift from working in the construction industry to working in the humanitarian engineering realm. And I was really fortunate enough that EWB had a job opening, and I applied, and that's what landed me here today. So I started working for EWB a little over 3.5 years ago now as a program engineer for the Community Engineering Corps program.
And I guess I'll go next. So my background, I'm actually from Colorado. I was born and raised, and I was always an outdoorsy kid. I'm not an engineer by trade, actually, but I'm the blend of both worlds. I always joke that my sister was an artist, my brother's actually a civil engineer, and I'm perfectly centered in the middle. So I have a degree in philosophy from Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, which is a very small liberal arts college, but similar to Natalie, my freshman year, I really wanted to get involved with assisting and helping others, whether it be here in the United States or internationally, and I fell into EWB-USA. I was very, very happy to join. I was given the opportunity to travel twice, but actually volunteered with the chapter for 4 years. And I really melded into the not project work. So I helped with fundraising, I helped with communications, I supported doing surveying and kind of non-engineering related work, but also supporting the engineers and the engineering needs for the communities that we supported. My background has always been in nonprofit work, though. So I have a background in tech and then nonprofit support, a couple of different nonprofits in Denver, as well as then the art scene and the art world, and then moved back into EWB once this position came available, because I really wanted to give back to communities in the United States. So I think this position really fit what I needed. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great way to talk about your path to EWB-USA. I know this is the Environmental Justice Lab podcast, and so I guess I need to ask before we get any further, what is your kind of perspective, and how have you, maybe in the past or maybe currently, thought through some of the environmental issues that we've kind of been hearing about and some of the things that the initiative is trying to address? Do you have any previous experience with that kind of work? Have you thought through any kind of issues in particular that may have been kind of near and dear to you? Or has coming to EWB kind of been the way that that's been fostered? How would you describe that?
Yeah, historically, I think being from the Southwest, a big advocacy issue that's always been around and present in my daily life was water, access to water. We had multiple droughts. The Colorado River is always in the news. It's always a topic of conversation. So even when I was a young kid, talking about where water comes from and how much snowpack we have. I was also an avid skier and snowboarder, so snow was really important. It was a constant conversation growing up. And how does that snow become our drinking water sources? How do we make sure that we maintain the water sources that we have and protect those for everybody to utilize? I was also a big recreational individual, so making sure that, again, water is safe, water is clean, and there for everybody. It was always kind of an outlying factor in my entire life, my entire childhood. So I think that's really where I got started.
Yeah, for me, it was really my experience with EWB as a volunteer that drew me to this work in the environmental justice space. My first project as an EWB volunteer in college was with a very small, about 100 people community in the Ecuadorian Andes. And they didn't have running water at their homes. They had to travel up and down a mountain that was 1,000 foot in elevation gain every day to just gather their water for drinking, for cooking, for cleaning. And that burden was primarily put on the women and children. So that was my first exposure to the real injustices that communities face throughout the world. And I continued my understanding and awareness through my volunteer experience. And when I got this job, I was very fortunate to get this job working with communities here in the United States. And that understanding of the injustices that communities face here just continued to grow and just really continue to instill that passion in me for communities here in the United States and communities that have been facing these environmental injustices here in our own country.
That's great. And what's interesting about that, when you describe your experience, I know for me, I read Engineers Without Borders and I automatically think international. I automatically think somewhere else over there far away from us where we don't have any problems with that. We're going to go and help people out there with their issues. And so I know for me, it was very interesting to then learn about the Community Engineering Corps, the CECorps, and what they're doing and how they're affiliated with EWB-USA, and the fact that EWB-USA is actually operating inside the U.S., which is something I wouldn't have thought because they're without borders, not within borders. And so either one of you, maybe Ellie, you can help us with this, but can you kind of give us an overview, some kind of broad understanding of what CECorps is? Because I imagine a lot of us don't think about Engineers Without Borders being in the U.S. The same way I don't think about Doctors Without Borders being here either. What is the CECorps? How long has it been going on? Just help us understand what this is and why we should be paying attention to it.
Gladly. So a little bit of background about CECorps. We did start in 2014. And in 2014, if you kind of go back in history, there was some big headlines about water and bridge issues, and there was a lot of crippling infrastructure happening here in the U.S. I think it was one of the first big highlights. It was in national news. Just speaking of kind of how we are maybe not looking at the U.S. as detailed as we should. And this really became an awakening in EWB-USA when volunteers started noticing and communities kind of reached out and they were asking for support, and our volunteers really wanted to help. And we had been operating internationally, but when you start to, put volunteer work in the United States, it does come with a lot of risks. You have to have professionals, you have to have insurance, you have to operate in a very traditional fashion. So Community Engineering Corps was created to provide those stopgaps and coverage and errors and omissions coverage for volunteers to effectively volunteer their time to the communities within their own backyards, within their own neighborhoods, within their own state, within this nation, and do it safely. And that's really what we wanted to do, is giving them the framework to do that safely and also give back. And so we were really excited when the program came together. So the program itself is a collaboration, our collective impact partnership between Engineers Without Borders USA, the American Water Works Association, which is also referred to as AWWA, and the American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE. So all three of these founding partners came together, developed this framework, and allowed for all of their volunteers in all of the organizations to volunteer and give back in the U.S., which was huge. It was a big milestone, especially for us so young. So now we have over, 100,000 volunteers from all the associations that get to practice and really give back to the communities in need.
Along with how you described it, can you tell me more? Natalie, you can as well. I don't know who would know more about these different questions that I'm asking. So if you got the answer, just jump in with it. But what kind of communities does CECorps work with, partner with? And is the process similar to the international partners that you have? So do these communities need to have an application? I spoke with Scott Gregory last week. You have to download the application, fill it out, demonstrate the need, describe how you came to know that need. It seemed very extensive and very comprehensive. I wonder if it's the same process for the CECorps to get involved with communities in the United States as well. Can you tell us more about that?
I'll gladly take that one as well. So when we talk about the communities we work with in Community Engineering Corps, we define those as underserved and overburdened. So that can be very broad, and we like that general terminology because issues in the United States are very different than issues internationally. When you sit there and say, hey, they need water, great, let's build a water pipeline, let's put in a tank, let's put in a pressure brake tank and make sure that each tap stand is operational by the time we leave. When we're working here in the United States, that looks very different. Sometimes it's communities that are saying, hey, the EPA has told me I'm in violation. I don't know what that means. I don't know what to do. What are my next steps to get from point A to point Z? And that's really where we saw our niche. So when it talks about water or structural assessments or anything infrastructure related, so we primarily just focus on infrastructure, we ask the communities, hey, what's your issue you're experiencing in an engineering capacity? When you kind of phrase it like that, they'll come in. We have an online application. Takes about 5 minutes initially, and it's really broad or general. Put in your name, your location, and what your engineering need is. and that's different for everybody. We wanted to keep it very low barrier of entry because we didn't want to restrict what somebody thinks is a priority. So communities are self-identifying their engineering need that they need assistance on. We follow up that initial application with a longer, extensive application, especially for those that fit within the parameters. One of our key parameters is it has to be a community-based project. So we don't support just individual houses or somebody's private well. We really want to make sure that the impact we're providing is to a broad base of individuals. So once we kind of get that criteria, hey, you don't have the capacity to pay for your services, B, you are in need of engineering assistance, we send them a secondary application, which is much longer. It's about 5 pages, but it just asks general questions. Who they are, what kind of organization they might be. Are they a nonprofit? Are they just a collected group of individuals that are advocating for their community? Or are they like a utility company? It really just helps to define who they are, and then we ask more about their engineering need. So we ask what the history is. So have you historically done anything? Have you received funding? What else have you tried to solve this problem? And once we get that information, it really does help paint a very detailed picture, about what they need. And in the end, we can help find a dedicated team that fits that specific need. So a unique feature about Community Engineering Corps, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, is we have a licensed professional engineer in the state, in the field. So by field, I mean water, sanitation, structural, on each project. Because our end goal is to help this community by providing engineering consulting. So by providing that engineering consulting, we give them what's called a professional engineering report, maybe a feasibility study, alternative analysis, and it's pretty much a justification or explanation of what their issue is and how to solve it. So with that information, they can go apply for grants. They can lobby at city council. They can advocacy groups can support them. They can kind of push their need further and really get from, again, point A to point Z.
That is interesting. Before you jump in, Natalie, I want to ask you this question directly so you can kind of explain the way you want to, because you're, the engineer on the call. And so I want to ask you what kind of projects CECorps typically works on, like what have you seen specifically? But even broader than that, I'm curious to know, because Ellie talked about providing consulting services, engineering reports, feasibility studies, alternatives analysis. These are all really big, like consulting buzzwords that all of us who are professional engineers know all about. But what we also know is that it does not include construction, the actual physical building of the infrastructure. And so as you kind of help us understand the types of projects that you work on with CECorps, can you also explain to us and help us see how far CECorps takes a project, and then what happens at the end of CECorps' commitment to those projects that they work on? What happens after that, once that particular part of it is completed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ellie really did a great job of explaining the niche that we fill as a program. What we aim to do at CECorps is we help bridge that gap to funding sources for communities. So there's a lot of funding that's out there now, especially with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, with the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money that's being funneled into infrastructure in the United States. And a lot of that is actually being earmarked to underserved communities. But that doesn't mean that that's showing up in the community's bank accounts, right? So what we try to do at CECorps is we help bridge that gap through engineering and consulting to help them access and tap into that funding. So what that means, or what that could look like, is communities, in order to apply for grant funding to improve their infrastructure, they more often than not need a preliminary engineering report or an engineering cost estimate or some type of engineering report to even apply for that grant funding and even make them competitive on those grant applications. So what we're able to do is we're able to provide that pro bono engineering so the communities can utilize our services to produce that preliminary engineering report or whatever it needs, so that the communities can apply for the grants and then receive the infrastructure money. And then they can go and they can hire local engineers, local contractors, local consultants to actually build and improve their infrastructure. So that's one of the things that we do at Community Engineering Corps, but our main scope of service really is just that consulting and engineering piece. So we don't want to take away from the capacity of local engineers, as Ellie mentioned, and I just want to stress, we work with the communities that really don't have access or cannot afford traditional for-hire services. And we're there so that we can provide those initial engineering and consulting needs so that they can tap into that funding and then take the project and see it all the way through to infrastructure improvement.
Nice. And as far as the projects go, I know that Scott last week talked about how the vast majority of what they do internationally is water related. And then there's some sanitation. And he said there's some small structural work that they'll do, but it doesn't make up a whole lot. And there's a few energy projects. Do you feel like the makeup of the projects locally with CECorps is similar in how it's divided out? Or are you seeing more of other types of projects coming through?
Yeah, so we historically have had the most water and sanitation projects, but we are seeing more and more civil works projects, which is what we consider bridges, roadway improvements, other type of community facilities. We do have structure projects as well, just like our international program. They tend to be more pedestrian bridges or structural assessments of buildings to receive solar panels or structural assessments of buildings in order to apply for a building permit or something of that sort. We do have a lot of solar projects. So we're working with community and community organizations to design solar systems for their organizations. So it's a little bit all over the board with Community Engineering Corps. Like I said, historically, we have had the most water and sanitation projects, but solar, civil works, agriculture, which is what we consider community gardens, those aren't far behind from the water and sanitation projects.
Actually, this year was the first year that civil works projects surpassed water and wastewater projects.
Oh, wow. Okay. That is interesting. So when I think about communities in the United States, and I think about this environmental justice initiative and what we're talking about, when you go into these communities in the U.S. and when you see these types of projects that need to be done, I would imagine that a lot of that underservice and overburden that they're experiencing is no fault of their own. And so how would you characterize what you're seeing in these communities as you provide services to them? What kinds of inequalities are you seeing? What types of burdens are you kind of confronting? And how would you describe the reasons for those existing in those communities?
When we talk about some of the inequities that exist in the United States that we are working to address at Community Engineering Corps, we're talking communities that lack access to basic infrastructure. So there are 2.2 million and growing Americans that live without basic access to water and sanitation in their homes. Native Americans are 19 times more likely than white households to lack that indoor plumbing, and Black households are twice as likely than white households to lack that indoor plumbing. There's also millions of people that lack access to green spaces and parks, and we all know that there have been many studies that show how the positive impact that those green spaces and parks have on the quality of life and human beings. So those are just some of the basic infrastructure statistics that we are working to address at Community Engineering Corps. Why do those exist? It's systemic. There have been infrastructure investments in the past in the United States, and these communities have historically been left behind. There have been inadequate resource allocation for these communities, and they just struggle to keep up with the rest of the infrastructure in the United States. Ellie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything Natalie said. There has been historical direct infrastructure related actions like redlining, for example, that have literally cut people off of food and create food deserts. It really depends on what type of projects we're talking about. In small rural communities, buildings do start to degrade when they're left and they're not maintained or taken care of, but it's still a resource that a community wants to utilize. So having those structural assessments to make sure that those buildings can be used to its fullest potential is key. And that's nothing that the community did. It's just maybe how time has gone. The last major infrastructure investment in the United States was, I believe, over 30 years ago. And so when you're meeting communities whose water infrastructure hasn't been updated for 30 years, they're out of compliance. It's very common we go into communities and a select few will know where their water comes from, but the remainder are, they bought a home. They just assumed water's my right and that's what I get. Why is it not working? Why is it not here? And it's a big learning curve sometimes for a lot of individuals, I think in the United States especially. So it's very broad, and it depends on what kind of projects we're talking about as to the history of that issue and why people aren't getting their basic infrastructure needs met.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think one of the things that I struggle with a lot of times on this podcast and just reading about these inequities in general is a lot of times I believe that these things could be addressed from a policy perspective and that there could be changes made to the way these cities, these counties, these rural areas are governed that would allow for those inequities to be at least minimized to a large degree. And so I wonder, as you do the great work you're doing with CECorps, as you're going into these communities, do you ever ask yourself why you need to be there when we live in what is a very wealthy, highly advanced, well-governed society with local, state, national legislators? We have mayors and governors. We have the structure in place to allow for policies to be implemented that could assist these communities in ways that other parts of the world just don't have. And so I wonder, so my question has two parts. One, for you two, why is working domestically as engineers and doing engineering work so important for you to be a part of? And second, how do you see your role in what you do in relation to the responsibility, I would say, that our governing structures have to these communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to do this work here in the U.S. because the problems that we see internationally exist here in our own communities. And if we want to do this work internationally, we have to look in our own communities and do the work and address the issues that exist here as well. There are communities all throughout the U.S. that lack basic access to infrastructure, as I just mentioned. They've been left out of infrastructure investments. And if there aren't organizations like our own doing this work here in the U.S., and we're not seeing the policies, we're not seeing the governmental organizations catching up, then who else is going to be doing that work?
Yeah.
And I'll add to that too. Sorry, Ellie, I know you want to add something. The communities that we work with, they are capable of doing this type of work. They just need that extra support and that extra capacity building of engineers and of the consulting to really just take them to the next level. They're the experts of their communities. They're the ones that understand the challenges that they face. We never pretend to understand those challenges the way that they live them, right? But what we are able to do is just to help build their capacity so that they can move forward with that infrastructure project.
The funny story I always tell, actually, I was leaving for my second EWB trip, and I was going to Colombia, then to do a project in Ecuador. And I was talking to my mom, and she was like, Ellie, I don't understand why you have to leave the country to go do the work that you're doing. And it was very eye-opening for me. And especially since I went to a college, Fort Lewis College, for the last it has a 200-year-old treaty that actually gives free tuition to anybody that's affiliated with a tribal nation or a tribal entity. So and they have their first language that they teach is actually Navajo. Very good friends of mine are from tribal nations, and I saw some of the inequities that they were experiencing firsthand, and it was just it resonated very quickly with me why U.S. work is needed. And those were very, obvious ones. Now that I've actually integrated myself into the work that we do here, there are many, many, many communities that lack that basic infrastructure, that when we talk about how tons of policies are acting at the top, how federal agencies are trying to put into play, I think, funding or resources or other ways to get involved to support these communities. We also have the grassroots efforts that are addressing these issues and trying to fix them as quickly as possible because they know what that is. And it's a big gap. I know I'm using a lot of hand gestures, so I apologize. But there's a big gap between the resources that are being produced and trickling all the way down to those communities that don't have the capacity or resources to tap those. For example, we work with a community partner, and she was the secretary for 2 other communities, but she still needed to apply for SDF funding, state revolving funds, to get a building or bridge redone. She had to apply 3 times. So when you have people that are advocating at the grassroots level, it's utilizing a lot of their time and their resources to tap these access portals from the top. And we just know that a lot of that can be assisted with engineering. Once we gave her a PER, or the preliminary engineering report, she can sit there and say, this is how much money I need. This is where I know it needs to come from. And here's who I'm going to utilize to do this job. And that was huge. Instantly, federal funding goes, you check the boxes, and we can give you the money you need to do it. So hopefully that answered both questions about kind of where I came from, but also where that gap is. There's a big gap between how these created policies actually get down to the people who need the most.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Does CECorps or any of its partners within the alliance have a relationship with any of the local or city, municipal councils or governments or organizations to try to create ways to allow for that funding or to demonstrate the needs? Or do you kind of sit back in the background and kind of push the partners for the community groups and those grassroots activists and kind of let them kind of take that lead and address those governing structures directly?
So to answer your question, historically, we really followed what our community partners needed. We work with utility companies. We work with advocacy groups. We work with concerned citizens that have just joined together. Our stakeholders, our clients are very broad. We talk about who we work with, but we traditionally, again, support them in elevating their advocacy and providing them the infrastructure information they need. So really all those key details that they need to advocate for themselves. Is historically how CECorps has operated. I'll pass it over to Natalie and she can talk more about the future.
Yeah. And so now we see the need as CECorps to really actively be a part of the conversation at a national level and then also trickling down to the smaller municipalities and local governments. And what we are a part of now is we're really happy to say that we're going to be on 4 of EPA's Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance and Training Centers, or EJ-TICTACs for short. What these centers are is they're essentially a hub for environmental justice communities to go to access resources needed to improve their environmental injustice challenges. And Community Engineering Corps is going to be one of those resources for communities. So when communities go to these EJ-TICTACs, and if the need is engineering or consulting related, we as CECorps will be able to assist them through our program. And I think that the important thing of those is that it's not just, again, we're working with communities directly, but we're also part of that advocacy and part of the larger conversation of doing what we can at the highest level, all the way down to the communities, of giving these, or ensuring that these communities have the justice that they deserve.
I'll also say another crucial part about the Tic Tacs and the EFC is it's bringing so many organizations like ourselves together. So there's organizations that work with larger agencies or maybe full states or territories, but we work on a smaller scale. And by bringing us all together, we're also equalizing the playing field for, while this is just an example, county of Centennial, Colorado, while they might need an entire water system upgrade, we're also here as Community Engineering Corps to advocate for those smaller communities, maybe saying this community of 1,000 people still also deserve that too. And it's nice to have, again, a large breadth of supporters trying to maximize number one, the utilization of this funding that's coming out, but also to making sure that everybody's voices are heard to the best of the capacity of all those included.
Nice. That
Does that answer
exciting.
your question?
I know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that was a fantastic answer. And I will say it does warm my heart to hear how CECorps is operating in both directions, on the ground with the groups, providing actionable consulting services. Those are expensive services. I used to provide them. I think, Natalie, you may have been a part of providing them previously before you came to EWB-USA. Those are expensive services. And to provide those is an amazing gift to communities who know what they need, but don't have the technical ability to demonstrate what the need is, why they need it, how much it's going to cost to provide for that need. And so to do that is fantastic. And then to come around on the other end, on the advocacy side, and be a part of these EJ tax. I will say I'm at University of South Carolina working with some other researchers. They're in one of those taxes as well, along with, I think it's UNC and Duke and a couple of other universities, trying to provide research and different types of statistical analysis to kind of highlight some of the issues as well. And so all of that really does serve everyone very well. And so I'm glad to hear CECorps is doing that. And in that vein, I do want to talk a little bit about the initiative as well that EWB-USA has and how that kind of plays into what we've been discussing. So it's called the Environmental Justice and Climate Resilience Initiative. I know from speaking with Scott Gregory last week that a lot of it, at least from what he does, deals with international programs and projects. A lot of it is climate resilience because people who live in certain parts of the world are kind of exposed to the impact of climate change differently than the rest of us in the developed world. And so Engineers Without Borders USA is trying to help people address those concerns. I wonder how this initiative plays out in CECorps and how that may have impacted or influenced even the work that you do, whether it's the projects that you take on, what you're trying to accomplish through them. I know Scott made a comment about raising awareness among the people working on the projects. What are some of the things that this initiative has done with the work that you're doing at CECorps?
Natalie, I'll start and you want to jump in? Awesome. What we really noticed when the initiative started, and I believe Scott Gregory probably also mentioned this in the last episode, we were already working in these arenas. All of our projects fall within climate resiliency, environmental justice. It's always been there. We were working around it, and I feel, especially in the United States, these words are now becoming buzzwords. They're now becoming more present in news and with your communities. That we are really highlighting that because it's been there the entire time. And we want to make sure that people know the work that's being done here is directly going to support communities who are fighting environmental injustices or climate change. Climate resiliency is a huge part of the projects that we do. For example, as of today, I know there's major flooding. Today is the 10th of July, and there's major flooding in New York, and people's houses are being impacted directly by climate change. And we have communities that experience the same thing. They go through a 100-year flood and need to elevate their homes and need to apply for a FEMA grant. And we're here to support that. So it's really taking things that we already knew were in our projects and having the opportunity to highlight them because everybody's talking about it. And it's now something that we should all be talking about. And it's important for people to know. Natalie?
Yeah, I think I was just going to add to it, Ellie, like just to emphasize that as Ellie mentioned, the initiative in many ways is what we have been doing as a program. It puts a initiative to the work that we have been doing since 2014 with Community Engineering Corps in particular. But what the initiative also allows us to do now is to be a part of these conversations on the national level through the TIC-TAC, through the other means that we've mentioned, so that we are really elevating it. We're elevating the work that we're doing in the EJ arena.
No, that's great. That's great. And I would agree that just from hearing you discuss the projects and what you're trying to accomplish, you're clearly operating within that realm. And I know that the communities that you work with are definitely appreciative of the opportunities to get their needs addressed in this very particular way through CECorps. And so I'm 100% sure that EJ, climate resilience, all of these issues are being front and center and being addressed directly by the work that you're doing. And so that is fantastic. Does the initiative provide anything to CECorps directly in terms of maybe funding or resources to continue what you've been doing? I don't know how that works. I just see the money and you've reached the money. Does it get distributed? Like, how does that work? Is that touchy question? Yeah. I mean, the reason I ask those kind of questions is because if you go to the website, so on my pages, I'll say, hey, EWB has this new initiative. Look at it. It's great. Look what it's doing. It's so exciting. You go to it, you see the fundraising goal, you see the description. And I think in my mind, and maybe a lot of people's minds too, it's, there's a new initiative that EWB has. I'm going to give to it. And by giving to it, I'm going to support their efforts to address these issues that they're describing on their page. And so I ask everybody I talk to, hey, I give you $10. You've met your goal of $50,000. Surely it's doing something for you that you wouldn't have done otherwise.
Yeah. It's great. Great question then.
No, yeah. So that money is directly going to us as a program to help us move forward in these types of projects. So any money that is funneled through EWB through this initiative is supporting the Community Engineering Corps program, is supporting Ellie and I being here. It's supporting us being able to have a framework in place so that we could practice engineering legally, ethically, responsibly in the United States. And it's allowing us to increase our capacity so that we can work with more communities and we can continue this conversation on a larger scale.
Yeah, it really does help us, like Natalie's saying, staff and having the program operate, but also we can put money into the hands of volunteers to travel if they need to hire a water testing or water quality testing source done. Those are really important. Once they say, hey, you have this level of lead, this level of arsenic, this is what your water is like. Those aren't cheap. They're very expensive and they start adding up. So when we have, and again, I'm only using water as the example, 15 to 20 of those projects, actually we currently have 28 of those projects, and each one needs a water quality test, you're looking at $1,000 for each one, minimum. So those funds will really help make sure that the resources we're providing are supporting those communities directly, that they do get the information they need, that our volunteers are operating safely, they can get to where they need to go, and all the resources are there. So the initiative is really important, especially talking about EJ too, when we have to do air quality testing or, trying to increase food structure, food security. You want to make sure that you can do a proper survey, giving survey tools. That's all things that we really want to get our volunteers in the hands of those volunteers.
Well said. And I think it's a good point to make that CECorps is here, but this initiative what we would say in the consulting world is that it increases our capacity, right? It allows us to do more, and then it allows us to be able to target more. So now we can actually go after this. If we were consulting, we can go after a certain project or a certain client or a certain, program, because now we have more resources available to us. And so that's what this initiative can provide, right? It can help us do some of the things that we know need to be done, but we may not have always had the ability to go and do it, to test for those contaminants, to test for the quality of the air, to go into certain places and do what we know is necessary to really provide the best service possible.
Yeah. And talking more about environmental justice as like the buzzword, the definition of environmental justice between even federal agencies is so broad.
Yes, it is.
That those resources that come through the impact funds or the funds that are coming through EWB and our partner associations, it helps us as CECorps to narrow down what our niche in environmental justice is. Like, again, going back to that consulting, how do you target what your area and space is? Environmental justice is so broad, and we know we fit in it, and we know certain spots. We really like to hone in on what that actually means, because once we do that, our volunteers support more. They have targeted projects. We know who our demographic is. We know who the projects are, what the projects are. And it's huge. That'll be a huge unlock of those resources if we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want people to know that I get frustrated with organizations who use certain buzzwords, certain kind of catchphrases to fundraise off of without actually engaging the topics that are being discussed with those buzzwords. Maybe like 10 years ago, the thing was all about being sustainable.
Yeah.
You need to be sustainable, sustainability, energy efficiency. And so you kind of just throw it out there and people want to support it, and they should. But I know that you're just using that as more of a marketing strategy than an actual campaign or initiative you're trying to actually engage. And so I want to make sure that it's clear to people listening that they know this is not what that is.
Yeah.
Like,
no, we're doing the work.
Yeah, this money is going to these things, and they're really doing it. And some people overcompensate. Oh no, we've always been doing it we've always had this, which is great, but then it might undermine the need for the initiative. So then in my mind, okay, you've always been doing it. Now that it's popular, you're going to throw it out there to try to get even more funding from it. That's not the case here, but that could happen in a lot of different spaces. And I don't want anybody to think that that's what's happening here, because I love EWB personally. And if that's what I thought was happening, I wouldn't even bother to talk to everybody about it over and over again.
Yeah.
Because I'm not trying to just do that. I mean, I know you're doing the work, doing it well. And so I just want to make sure people are aware that if you get to the initiative, it will go to help an underserved community somewhere in the world.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I think when we keep saying we've been doing this work and talking it from that perspective, it's because we didn't just wake up one day and realize that communities are facing these injustices, right? It's just kind of talking about, it's a new way to talk about what we've been doing, but also, and not only that, but it's a way that we can hone in and dedicate our resources and our time of what we've been doing before, specifically for these challenges that we have always seen a need for, but now it's a way for us to really move that forward.
That was a phenomenal answer. But I want to transition now and kind of talk about each of you individually, personally. I know for me, for a lot of people, we've all kind of been on different journeys, done different things with our skills, and kind of invested in different things throughout our careers. And we'll start with you, Natalie. How would you describe the impact that CECorps and the work that it does has had on you personally? As an engineer, I know you've had a background in consulting and construction. This is very different from that. And so how would you describe the way that working at CECorps in your role as program engineer has impacted you on a personal level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the difference between the work that I was doing as in my previous career as a construction consulting and the work that I do here at CECorps or EWB is that this is engineering with empathy. There's so much feeling behind the work that I do. It's more than crunching numbers. It's real people's lives. It's human rights. It's quality of life. Seeing these projects that we do for Community Engineering Corps, what people in my previous consulting world might consider a very small project is a huge project for communities. Mm-hmm. It has a huge impact. And seeing those small, I'm using air quotes, project just make the world of a difference for these communities is just really what makes my heart so full, my engineering heart so full. So I think that's, the impact that this work has on me. I'm happy to give some examples of projects. I don't know if you maybe wanted to ask that next.
That'd be the next question.
Okay, cool. So I'll just end it there then.
Yeah, I had a question about personal stories. And so
okay,
that'll be the best time to talk about those. Ellie, how about you? How has CECorps impacted you on a personal level? I guess you've been more in the nonprofit world to begin with. So I wonder how this, I don't know if it's different than what you've done in the past or if it's hitting on certain things that you care about more so than other things. I don't want you to compare, your previous advocacy work to this one, but how has CECorps impacted you personally?
Yeah, that's a great question. It did have a lot. So there's a lot of comparisons between my other nonprofit work as well, mostly supporting underserved communities or overburdened communities. Historically, I worked with high school students, more getting in the job field and job opportunities and getting a technical skill. But this is very kind of similar. So we work with students and professionals and having the capacity to work on a program that sets individuals up to give back in their expertise, I feel like is really rewarding, but also personally for myself, very similar to Natalie's response. It's these communities that you watch and getting information into their hands and then them being empowered, already having the power, but really utilizing their existing power to then solve a problem their community's having is really, really rewarding. It's really impactful to see communities not feel like they're stuck and not feel like they don't have the tools or the resources to do what they need, and then to get that for free, and then watching these beautiful relationships between professional engineers and students with community that they might be super close to but had no idea was struggling. Those relationships also are what fuel my desire to keep going. We'll go to site visits and you'll see volunteers that are just so excited and know everything about the community. And they're like, we're invited to a party next week. And they bake us brownies and hang out with us. And it's just those personal connections, watching people from two different locations really find each other and connect is really, I think, what drives me. I think it's what makes my role here really special and why I want to stay.
Wow. No, that's powerful. Natalie, I will say that you should pitch engineering with empathy as the tagline for CECorps.
That's good.
That phrase.
I just came up with that.
You did. I know. I was like
that phrase moved me now to try to get a job there. That was heavy and deep and profound. And the reason I'm saying that is because as an engineer especially, you get so technical and so ingrained in the technical details and accomplishing the purpose of a project that I think a lot of times you forget about the people that you're trying to help. And you forget about the fact that there's a need that you're trying to address. And so to have empathy and to consider that in the process of developing a project and meeting someone's need, I think is something that clearly CECorps does extremely well. And that I would want every engineer listening to this to understand about their role. That is what's happening. We're not just building something to say we built it because the mayor wants it to be built. We're trying to meet communities and serve them in ways that improve their well-being and their quality of life. And so engineering with empathy, if you're not going to use it, I'm going to use it somewhere. So just
we'll
let
take
me
it
know.
and run with it together.
Let me know what you plan to do with that phrase, because I like it a lot, very much. So thank you for sharing that. And along with that, is there any personal stories, any personal experiences that you may have had with a project or with a community that kind of stands out to you as you've been working with CECorps? Anything that kind of touched you in ways that maybe the day-to-day kind of work that you do, you won't see it, but these instances really have hit home for you? Go ahead, Natalie.
Yeah, there's so many that come to mind. I really do just love the work that we do here, and I love my job. So every day I feel like I have glimpses of those moments. One community that we worked with in particular that comes to mind is a community it's a nonprofit in the Rondo neighborhood of Minneapolis. And this Rondo neighborhood it's a historically Black neighborhood. And there was a construction of Interstate 94, I believe, in the 1960s. It severed their community, but the fabric of their community was still there. But what it did do was it left them with infrastructure inequity. Not only was there now a highway that was going through their community, but most of the community was left in a food desert with food insecurity. And so we partnered with a nonprofit that has a few community gardens in the neighborhood. And through our volunteers in that area, we were able to design infrastructure improvements for a few of their community gardens, including making them accessible, including irrigation design, solar panels, just small things that enhanced their garden. But seeing the impact that it had on the community, allowing it to produce more fresh produce for the community that otherwise doesn't have access to it. It's just one of those examples of a small project that has just this great impact on a community that has faced these inequities firsthand.
I'll follow. I have two, and you can pick whichever one you'd like. My first community, or the community I'd like to talk about, would be a small community in Maryland. And so mine's a well project, and it was a well that provided water to about 16 homes, about 50 people. So really, really small, like very, very small on the scale of what infrastructure projects look like. But this particular community's well had one day just completely collapsed. Again, not due to their negligence, it collapsed. And they kind of told us, they reported, hey, my water smells burnt and doesn't look right. And they realized what was going on and contacted their local municipality and was like, hey, how do we solve this problem? And the municipality's like, let's talk about maybe consolidating with us. Once they did that entire survey, the consolidation cost was almost $1.2 million. So to get them connected, it was impossible. They literally, even if they came together with their local neighbors outside of this one system, $1.2 million to connect themselves is infeasible. So we were very fortunate to partner with another nonprofit, the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Partnership branch, so the Southeast Region's branch of RCAP, as well as our volunteer team to support this community in doing an entire preliminary assessment, giving them a full cost estimate of what a new well would cost. We actually did a feasibility study, gave them a couple options, but a new well was the one that picked. And this community was able to win multiple grants, redrick their well, and it cost almost, I believe, $200,000 in the end. And so by really getting the information in the hands of those community members, they were able to get water back to their community. They were able to stay on the system that they knew how to operate, and continue to get water. My second project is not completely completed yet. Yeah. But it's a great story and a great project because it's supporting a very historical Black cemetery in St. Louis. And what the cemetery was facing is that they had a lot of irrigation issues. St. Louis has a lot of stormwater management issues with a lot of water runoff. And to access this cemetery, to actually get visitors in so people can see their loved ones. So historians, because this is a very, very old cemetery, it's very heavily researched with historians, wanting to know who famous individuals buried there. And they were pretty much, the cemetery was inaccessible. The roads were divoted out to the point that had 3-foot holes, and you couldn't get vehicles around. And the entire cemetery is also supported by volunteer support. So to do basic ground maintenance wasn't even accessible. We have a great team in St. Louis that has provided the entire redesign of their entire pathway system. And we have a corporate partner that has been very gracious and is donating all the materials for the construction. So it was this twofold project to not only do the designs, but thanks to this corporate partner, all the materials provided are going to be donated, and then hiring local construction workers to then implement the entire project, really rejuvenating this historical cemetery and making it accessible to those that need it.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And I imagine there's many more like them, and there'll be many more in the future as you continue to do this work. And so just for us listening, just to close out the episode, because I know you're talking about these projects, I'm sure they're ongoing and you're busy people. So how can we help those of us listening? Maybe we're professional engineers, maybe we're not, maybe we're researchers, maybe we're just concerned citizens, maybe we live in an area where we know these services could be useful. How can we help and contribute to the work that you're doing with CECorps alongside EWB-USA and your partners? What can we do to help?
Yeah, for those that want to learn more, I always say just check out our website. We do have our own website, communityengineeringcorps.org. It has a lot of information and might help fill in some of the gaps that we might have missed. So if you want to get more information, that's a great start. And also spreading the word. Even if you're not an engineer like myself, you know that there's issues going on maybe in your own backyard. There's individuals that need support. So it's always good to say that there are resources out there and how organizations like yourselves can help.
And then to add to that, volunteer. You do not have to be an engineer to get involved, to volunteer. Hopefully Ellie's a great example of that. And then, of course, as Dr. Leslie, you had mentioned several times now, just donating to the initiative, donating to the program, that really allows us to continue having a program and continue giving back to these communities.
Perfect. So donate your time, donate your money if you can, and inform your circle of influence what's going on in your community around the country, and continue to make people aware of these issues. I think is a really important thing that we could all do, and you don't have to have an engineering background to do it. And so I appreciate that. And with that, we are going to conclude our episode. I want to give another special thanks to Natalie and Ellie for spending so much time with me this afternoon, sharing their experiences, helping me understand what CECorps is, how that fits with EWB, and how they are confronting these environmental justice and climate resilience issues on the ground in the United States. I so much appreciate your time being on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that is it for this episode of the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time. Oh.